Hey, and welcome to this week's coaching video for those of you who are going to be teaching on Sunday morning, February the 8th at Dayspring. If you're teaching an adult small group on that day, this video is designed to help you get ready to teach the lesson that you're going to be working through. So go ahead and grab your teaching transcript. You should have a copy of that. It's the Life on Mission lesson dated February the 8th, 2015. Now, here's where we are as we move into this week's Life on Mission emphasis in both our reading and in our sermon content, and of course also in your small group time. The Life on Mission emphasis moves now to the role of spiritual development in advancing the mission. We have to make a priority of spiritual growth if indeed we're going to accomplish the mission of every man, woman, and child having access to the gospel, being able to see it and to hear it. Because think about this. Let's say that somehow strategically we figured out how to mobilize every single churchgoer in such a way that we all come in contact with every unbeliever in this world. Let's just say we figure it out. And we do the math and we figure out the geographies and we say, all right, here's how we can get every single believer into proximity and in relationship with every single unbeliever in this world. Well, think about it. If we were to mobilize ourselves in that way, but we weren't mobilizing spiritually mature people, if we had a bunch of carnal Christians or people who didn't even really follow God very well, if those were the ones coming into contact with all the believers, then what we would be doing, we wouldn't be accomplishing our goal of every man, woman, and child being able to see and hear a good demonstration of the gospel. We would just be coming into contact with people. So spiritual development and spiritual growth it has to be a priority if indeed the mission is going to advance. And that's why in your reading and in all of that right now, it's talking about spiritual growth and all of those things. Now, what you're going to be doing in this lesson is you're going to be presenting ways in which an accurate picture of Jesus can be seen and heard. Ways that not just we can come into proximity with those who are lost, but ways in which the gospel needs to be seen and how it can be seen through those with whom we come in contact. So that's what this is about. This is about people seeing the gospel, seeing a clear picture of the gospel. So this lesson is really a piggyback onto the one that you taught last week. It's almost a part two, but you're going to be looking at various passages to make the various points along the way, all right? So let's look at the lesson together. Page 1 is just your overview, your teaching overview. It sums up a little bit of what I just shared with you. Look on pages 2 and 3. This is an opening, not really an opening illustration, but just an opening to the lesson itself. You start off by reading to the group 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Now, this verse should sound familiar to you because it was our memory verse just a couple of weeks ago. So hopefully, not only does it sound familiar to you, but it sounds familiar to your group members as well. And there's an intentional reason for starting your lesson off with this verse. This is just reinforcing to your group that scripture memory is important. So highlight that, as you start the lesson off, say, as you see in your lesson, look at it on page 2. You have everybody open their Bible to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, and then you read it out loud to the group. But it wouldn't hurt you to say, hey, open up to 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, which served as our memory verse a couple of weeks ago. And you can even make a joke, like, I know that all of us have it memorized as such, but let's look at it together in print. And at that point, you read it to everyone. And I want you to listen to this verse. I'm going to read it to you because I want to make sure I quote it exactly as it is. But look at this. It says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And that's the specific part of the verse that you're going to read. There's some parts of that verse preceding that and following that, but that's the part I want you to focus on and to read. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Now, look at your teaching transcript. You're going to read that verse, and then you're going to ask this question. Look at the question. It says, according to this passage, what are we supposed to always be prepared for? And probably what's going to happen in your group, everybody's going to say you need to be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. But look at the specific question again. What we need to be prepared to do is to give an answer when we are asked why we have hope. Now, this is an important part of this verse. This verse is making an assumption that people are asking us the question, why do you have hope? I've noticed something about you. There seems to be a reason for the hope that you have. What is that? So 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 is telling us, it's not just saying be prepared to give an answer. It's saying be prepared to give an answer because people should be asking you to give them an answer. That's a pretty important part of the puzzle. The point is this: unless people see something compelling in us, they're not going to be curious about our faith. Unless people see something, that there is a qualitative difference about us, both in the way that we're living on the outside and something about those inside qualities that we have, unless they can see a definable difference in our lives, they're not going to be asking us any questions. And there's a great quote on this introduction in page 2 from Francis Chan. Look at it toward the bottom of page 2. He said, "We don't give anyone a reason to ask about what makes us unique, so nobody asks. Yet we still feel the need to evangelize. So we end up coming across like salespeople peddling a product that didn't really work for us." I mean, this is a pretty big statement that he's making, but it's true. Unless people see something compelling in us, then why do they want to hear what we have to say to them? Trying to evangelize people who aren't curious about our faith is like a salesman trying to peddle something that people say, "Oh, that probably doesn't even work." So there needs to be spiritual growth in our lives. There needs to be something about us that causes people to say, I want to explore their faith. I want to inquire about their faith and get an answer about their hope. So this lesson is all about presenting to your group, what are some things that people need to see from us? What are the kinds of things that might cause them to explore and inquire? Now, here's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm not going to go page by page on this and kind of read it because I think this lesson is pretty self-explanatory. So let me give you the big picture here of what you're presenting as a teacher. You're going to present 3 things, 3 points, if you will, that if people see these things in us, then maybe, just maybe, they will inquire. Maybe, just maybe, they will explore and ask us about the hope that we have. And of course, we need to be prepared to answer that. So what are the 3 things that people need to see from us? Here they are. Number 1, they need to see us interacting with God in the good times. Number 2, they need to see us interacting with God in the difficult times. And number 3, they need to see us interacting with God when we sin. In the good times, in the bad times, and when we sin. If people observe us interacting with God properly in those moments, that might be the catalyst that causes them to inquire about our faith. So let's look at those 3 things just briefly, kind of page by page in your lesson. On page 4, this is the first point, that people need to see you interact with Jesus in the good times. You're going to read a passage there in which the Apostle Paul talks to the believers, and he said, hey, you observed my life. You observed how I walked with God. And what Paul is really pointing to here, he says, you saw in me a flourishing faith. So here's the gist of this point. Here's the gist. You want to ask your group members in your life, where are those moments where your faith is flourishing? Is it at home? Is it at work? Is there a group of people that you recreate with where there's a pretty good demonstration of the gospel there? In other words, where are the moments in your life that people can see the gospel really shining there? And what you're trying to say in this point is you need to be intentional about bringing people into that so they can see that, because that's a good gospel witness. Now, you may have to clarify on this point. Look at page 5 on your transcript at that little coaching tip there in the gray square. You may need to clarify, because it might sound as if what you're saying is we just need to show off how good we are to people. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is when people see us demonstrating good attitudes, good behaviors, when they see a healthy family, when they see a healthy softball team, when they see all of that, because of what Christ has done in us, that is a powerful catalyst that piques people's curiosity about our faith. And if you really need to clarify this point, there's a good verse mentioned on page 5 in that coaching tip, in that gray square, Matthew chapter 5, verse 16. Look that up. In fact, it's our memory verse for the week. So it shows us how when our light is shining, when we're actually doing things right in our faith, that is a catalyst for people seeing God and embracing God and following God as well. So, point number one is simple. People need to see us interacting with God where we're doing it well, where we're practicing our faith well. The second point, found on page 5, people need to see you interact with Jesus in the difficult times. Boy, this is really important. When people see me interacting with God when times are good, that's a good thing, but it only takes them so far. If they see that I continue to interact with God and love God and follow God when times are difficult, that is a strong, strong testimony. In fact, look at the question on page 5, a hypothetical question. And you'll notice there's a lowercase g when talking about God here because it's a hypothetical question. If you were observing someone who had a God, a generic God, not the God, but some God, all right? Look at the question. If you saw someone trusting their God during the easy times, but not the difficult times, what would you conclude about their God? Just think about that. Imagine you didn't have a faith persuasion, but you were open to matters of faith, and here's a person over here who believes in a certain God. If you notice that they trusted God and they followed God when things were good, but didn't when things were bad, what would you conclude about their God? And would you be curious to believe in their God or even want to inquire or explore that? The answer is no. A God who can't help in the hard times, what kind of God is that? So here's the point that you're teaching. People need to see God and us interact with God when things are flourishing, but they also need to see us interact with God when times are difficult because that's a powerful, powerful testimony. The third point you're making is found on page 6, number 3, and this is a biggie, okay? People need to see you interact with Jesus in your sin or when you sin. Now look at the paragraph right under that point that's made. I'm going to read that to you because I think it's very well written. It says, showing people Jesus in the good times will only go so far. Showing people Jesus in the midst of life's difficulties will certainly paint a better picture of what it means to follow him. But showing someone how you deal with your own self-inflicted failures has the potential to affect the greatest impact of all on a life. That all depends on how you interact with Jesus because of your sin. Here's the whole point in this, and you've got a passage there that you'll read. When people see you interacting with God in the midst of your sin, what they're going to see here is a very, very important piece of the puzzle. What they will see here is forgiveness. They will see restoration. They will see redemption, reconciliation. When you think about all of those things, think about those words: forgiveness, reconciliation, redemption. That is the gospel message. So if people only see me interacting with God during the good times and the difficult times, those are really good. But if they see me interacting with God in my sin and seeing my repentance, but also seeing God receive my repentant spirit and seeing God restore me in my sin and all of that, that really, really paints a powerful picture of the gospel. Now, this third point that you're making about us interacting with God in our sin, no doubt as a teacher who's leading a group of people, this is going to raise a lot of questions, okay? And that's okay, because here's how this lesson is designed. It's intended to answer those questions, not as you teach, but in your group breakout time. In fact, flip on over to page 11 on this handout. On page 11, what you have is the small group handout. Once you break your group into their discussion groups, which I hope that you're doing, that you're not just lecturing, if you break them into these discussion groups and now let them start working this out, look at question number 3 on this handout. It says, in our lesson today, we talked about letting people see how we interact with God when we've sinned. What exactly do you see that looking like, and what kinds of precautions and or limitations do you think need to be exercised in this process? Do you see what's happening here? You're basically making the point that people need to see us interact with God when we sin. They need to see us receiving forgiveness. They need to see us being restored back to a healthy relationship with God. But you're not really answering what exactly does that look like? How do we bring people into that? What do we let them see as it relates to that? What you're doing now is you're putting them in clusters and letting the collective wisdom of your group answer that, okay? So once you break them into small groups, they should answer that question that's probably surfacing when you teach that point. What I might do if I were you, once I broke everybody into small groups and clusters and let them work through this handout, giving them adequate time to work through it, what I might do is kind of regather the troops and say, hey, all right, now that you've worked through that handout, I'm curious. Question number 3, and now let everybody talk about it out loud and hear the different answers and hear the different wisdom. You have collective wisdom if you have a group of believers. Let that surface, because what you might find out on this particular one is that collectively you guys may come up with a really good answer of what it means and what it looks like to let people see us interact with God when we have sinned against him. All right? So this is your lesson that you're teaching. People need to see the gospel in us, all right? And they need to see something that compels them to ask us questions. They need to see something that piques their curiosity, that they would say, I want to inquire about their God. What is it about their God that is so compelling? If they see us interact with God when we're flourishing, that's good. If they see us interact with God when times are difficult, that's even better. If they see us interacting with God and continuing to relate to God after we've sinned, then that may really push them over the edge, and it may lead them to say, I need to ask you a question about Jesus. And then we can be prepared to give an answer about the hope that we have. Look at your memory verse, the end of page 10, back up to page 10. We need to let them see something that makes them want to explore. And look at how it's worded here in Matthew 5:16. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Let them see something that'll eventually lead them to our God. All right? That's your lesson this week. I hope it's very helpful. Hey, be sure to do your reading throughout the week. You should have read chapters 7 and 8 by the time you teach this lesson. Maybe there's some good things you can draw out there and insert into this lesson outline as well. All right? But let's keep pushing forward. Let's keep learning more and more what it means and what it looks like to live our lives on mission. Thanks for teaching adults here at Dayspring. God bless you. We'll see you Sunday.